So your granddad just died and left you a Leica M6, and now you want to learn how to shoot film. So in order to shoot film, you're going to need three things: a camera, a lens, and a roll of film. There's a bunch of different film stocks to choose from. My personal favorite is Portra 400. It's just a really versatile all-round film stock. However, it can be a bit pricey, so I recommend going for something a little bit more affordable like Kodak Gold or Fuji C200 for your first roll. You may have noticed the different numbers on the film boxes. This refers to how sensitive the film is to light, but I'll explain more on that later. So how do you get your film into the camera? Step 1. Loading film. Firstly, you'll need to open the back of your camera. More often than not, you'll need to pull up on the film rewind tab until you hear a pop. Once you've got your camera open, you'll need to insert your roll of film and press down on the film rewind tab to hold it in place. Next, you're going to pull the leader across and tuck it into the take-up reel on the other side of the camera. Once you've done this, you're going to want to advance the film using the film advance lever, making sure the film is pulling across and that the sprocket holes line up with the gears. You can then close your camera and advance to the first frame. Once the film's loaded, you need to set your camera's light meter to match the ISO speed of your film. So now we've got our film in the camera, what do we need to know before we can expose our first photo? Step 2. Understanding exposure. So you may or may not have heard of the exposure triangle, which refers to the three key elements required to accurately expose a photo. And those three things are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Aperture, measured in f-stops, controls the amount of light entering your camera. A low f-stop number like f1.4 allows more light into the camera and creates a shallower depth of field for a dreamy out-of-focus background in your photo. A high f-stop number like f16 or f22 allows less light into your camera, resulting in a sharp focus throughout your image. The next part of the exposure triangle is shutter speed. Shutter speed refers to how long your camera's shutter will stay open when taking a photo, controlling the amount of light coming into the camera. A faster shutter speed like 1/1000th of a second allows less light into the camera and freezes motion, whereas a slow shutter speed like 1/30th of a second allows more light into the camera, however can result in motion blur if you aren't stable with your shots. Lastly, we have ISO, which, as I mentioned earlier, refers to the film's sensitivity to light. Here's an example of a photo I shot on 100 ISO film. As you can see, there's very little grain and it was shot in direct sunlight. And here's an example of a photo I shot on 800 ISO film. As you can see, there's a lot more noise in the image and it's a much lower light situation. On the other end of the spectrum, here's an example of a photograph shot on 3200 ISO black and white film. As you can see, there's a ton of grain and it was shot at night. Now that we have a basic understanding of the exposure triangle, how do we find out what values to set for each of them? For example, if you open up your aperture super wide in the middle of the day, your image is most likely going to be overexposed. In order to compensate for the additional light, I'll need to increase my shutter speed to reduce the amount of light entering the camera. So how do you get a perfectly exposed image? That leads us to the final step, metering. There's two main ways to meter your photographs. You can use your camera's internal light meter if it's working, or you can use an external meter, like a dedicated light meter or a light meter app on your phone. And now it's time to get out there and shoot some photos, remembering to advance your film after every frame. Once you've shot through a roll of film to the point where you can't advance your film lever anymore, it's time to rewind the film and send it to the lab for development. To rewind your film, you need to find the film rewind button on your camera and then spin the film rewind lever until you hear a click. And if you're unsure, just keep spinning. Once your film is fully rewound, you can pop open the back and take your film out to send to the lab. So now that you've got a basic understanding of how to shoot film, why go through this complicated process in the first place? For me, there's two reasons. Firstly is the film look, or the aesthetic that comes with film photographs that just can't be recreated with digital. Secondly, film photography is different from digital photography in the way that it detaches you from your photos while bringing you closer to them at the same time. It brings you into the moment because you're not just snapping shots and having a look at them after you take them like when you shoot digital. Once you've taken a photograph, that's it. You can't see it. You have to wait to get that film developed at the lab before you can even see what you got, which brings you much more into the moment when you're shooting film. You can go out and shoot a whole roll of film and it could all be crap, but you wouldn't know because you can't see any of your photographs, which makes it a lot more fun. You know, if you go out shooting digital and you take a bunch of shots and you don't like any of them, you can almost leave with a bit of a bitter feeling. Whereas when you're shooting film, you don't know. So if you're having the time of your life shooting film and all the photos are crap, you still had a really good time while you were out shooting. Film photography for me is just hands-on and I love the process. I love having to go out there, take photos and wait to see what I've got. You know, I'm not just out there pumping out a million shots, hoping I get a good one and spending hours editing. You know, I'm out there in the moment, taking photographs, having fun. and then getting excited to get my results back from the lab. And there's how to shoot film. If you enjoyed this video, leave it a like. If you're new, subscribe to the channel, and drop me a comment if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them there. See you in the next one. Should I do the hand gesture or not? Yes. Okay. So your grandpa just... Go around the corner. I can't. Oh.